Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you guys 10 useful editing tips that you should know while making videos in DaVinci Resolve 16. So first off, I want to point out the autosave options that are available to you in DaVinci Resolve 16. So if we go up to the DaVinci Resolve menu at the top left when we have a project open, go down to Preferences, and then make sure that you are on the User tab. By default, it's often set to System. But if you go over to User and select Project Save and Load, then you'll have access to these save settings. So there's two options here, Live Save and Project Backups. You can have both enabled at the same time if you wish. They work very differently, but they could both be very useful to you. So Live Save is going to keep a running history of every change that you've made to your project since you've opened it up and started working on it in your current session. So that if you want to revert back to an earlier time, it's there in the edit history that you can just revert back with the click of a button, and every change that you've been making since that point in time will be reverted. However, Live Save only works while you have the project open. So as soon as you quit out of the program, those changes are not going to be held in memory any longer. Then there's Project Backup. So obviously you can hit Control S and save your project manually, but that will only save it to one file. So if you're working on a really long project, you may decide after a day of work, it would suck, but you may decide that you wanted to undo a lot of changes. Maybe add something like a crazy fusion effect that was working a day ago, but as soon as you started making additional changes to it today, you don't really know what happened to it, it looks terrible, and you want to revert that to the previous day. So that's where project backups can come in. So project backups by default will back up every 10 minutes, and it will store hourly backups for the past 2 hours, and also daily backups for the past 2 days. So these files will get stored in your user profile on your computer in a folder called Resolve Project Backups. So Resolve will already know where to find those by default as long as you don't change the location. So if you're working on a project and it's been there for a while, then as long as you've had project backups checked, it's going to save those files there. And then you can take your project and revert to those earlier project files. So to do that, you would go to File and then Project Manager. Find the project that you were working on that you want to revert, right-click it, and go down to Project Backups. So here you would see the project files and the date and time that they were saved for your previous versions of the project that you're working on. So if you need to go back an hour or an entire day, hopefully your auto backup should be here and you'll be able to revert your changes. So the second tip is using adjustment layers. So I can think of two really good cases for this. One is that you want to make some modifications to a clip without messing around with the original settings of the clip, because maybe you'll decide later on that the adjustment layer is unnecessary and you just want to keep it separate for some reason. So that could be something like a separate adjustment layer clip that rests on top of your clip that darkens it and makes some other changes, but you can toggle the adjustment layer on and off to decide if you want to keep those changes later on. So basically it just keeps things separated from each other, so you can just kind of keep your changes separated in that way. Another case would be that if you want to apply changes to multiple clips at the same time, an adjustment clip layer can actually sit over multiple clips in your timeline. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that. So if you go to the effects library and the edit page, go down to Toolbox, Effects, and then Adjustment Clip, we can drag this over our bottom clips and the Video 1 timeline by putting Adjustment Clip layer into the Video 2 timeline. So now I'm just going to take the edge of this Adjustment Clip layer and stretch it over all of the clips I want it to affect. So 2 clips here in the timeline. And now if we make any changes to the Adjustment Clip layer, it's going to, in a sense, multiply whatever we do here with the underlying base clip. So, for instance, I could do things like add a zoom in, and that zoom is going to affect both of these clips. And I could also change any of these default properties that exist down here below in the transform cropping sections and so on and so forth. But what might be even more useful than that is to actually apply an effect onto the adjustment clip layer. So if I go to Open Effects, I could find something like, let's say, a vignette effect, and actually drag that onto the adjustment clip layer. So by doing that, I'm basically now applying a vignette, as you can see by the darkening of the edges of this clip, to all of the underlying clips. And you can stack effects on top of it as well. You could even have multiple adjustment clip layers if you want to further separate your effects. So let's just say watercolor effect, why not? Making it very much simplifying all of the colors in both of these shots. So hopefully you can see that when you start to stack effects, hopefully you can see that if you want to stack effects, especially if you want those to affect multiple clips, you can actually just do it all at once with one adjustment clip layer or a couple adjustment clip layers. And you no longer need to worry about doing the effect for every single clip that you're going to put in your video. You could also, of course, copy the same adjustment clip layer further in the timeline and have the same effects later on in your video if you need to repeat it. So in that way, it can serve as a nice little storage for a template of effects that you may need as you do your video. So my third tip for this video is to get really used to using hotkeys. And when it comes to doing simple timeline edits, the ones that really matter are B, A, and T for blade mode, selection mode, and trim edit mode, respectively. So at any point in time that you want to make cuts, you can hit B to go into blade edit mode, which is going to give you this little cursor of basically a razor blade. And you can left click on your video clips in order to cut them in two. Hitting A switches you over to selection mode, which is really handy for when you want to select clips for movement or deletion. So my basic workflow is that I'll hit B to go into blade edit mode, and I'll cut away the parts of the raw footage which I know I'm not going to use, making those really rough cuts. And then I'll use the A key to switch to selection mode, left click on those unusable clips that I cut into pieces, and then hit the delete key to delete them, rather than to actually right click and do a ripple delete. So I guess I would add the delete key also to hotkeys to remember, because right clicking on your clips and then going up to the menu to do something like a ripple delete, I just find takes way too much time, especially if you're repeating that like once every 10 seconds. So it's just much quicker if you use A to go to selection mode, left click on the clip you want to delete, hit delete key, and then once you've gone ahead and made your simple rough cuts, that's when you can move into the trim tool by hitting T on your keyboard, or trim edit mode more specifically. And then you just find the edges where you maybe want to trim in a little bit because there's no spoken dialogue, making it a little bit more tight, or getting the clips side by side to match up with each other if you're trying to sync the footage. And then you just left click on the borders between your clips, drag them around, and get them into the place where you need them to be before you start adding your transitions. So using B, A, T, and the delete key as hotkeys is going to make your workflow a lot faster. Try to get out of the habit of relying on the toolbar icons using the mouse too much, and it should benefit you in the long run. So tip number 4, if you're running into bad performance issues with your video clips, especially if you're recording at high resolutions like 4K or 1080p, you may find that on a weaker computer, it's hard for it to handle DaVinci Resolve. So one way that you can kind of work around that without strictly upgrading your computer is to use what's called proxy mode. So if you go up to playback and then you go down to proxy mode, there is the option of setting your resolution here to half resolution or quarter resolution. So if you set it to half resolution and you take a look at your preview window, you might notice that it starts to look a little bit more blurry and choppy because the amount of pixels that's showing in your preview window has gone down. Likewise, if we go a step further down to proxy mode of quarter resolution, it's probably going to start looking not great. But the thing is that the proxy mode is only for the preview and the timeline. So when you actually export your video files, it's still going to be using the original resolution or the output resolution you decide to render to. So this proxy mode, lowering the resolution down in the timeline, is merely to make the performance of your video editing go a little bit smoother. Generally, when you're editing your video, you might not actually need it to look as good. As long as you can still see it and know what changes you're making, you can still do that at a lower resolution. So proxy mode is a way that you can save on some performance if your computer is struggling with running DaVinci Resolve. Now, another way, if you need to be a little bit more extreme about this, is that you can actually disable your video tracks. And you can do that one by one if you have a bunch of layers on top of each other, but you can hide your video tracks to further increase performance. So if I go to video track 1 and I click on this button here and I turn video track 1 off, then when I'm hitting the play button, it's no longer going to actually render video track 1 to the screen at all, which will give you obviously even better performance than if you were showing video. because now it's only going to be playing the audio. So at some point, you'll probably need to look at your video tracks and preview it. But if you're doing a very audio-focused presentation and maybe at some point in time, you're just getting kind of fed up with a bad performance, then you can do that a step further. Though if your computer's struggling with playing the video at a quarter proxy resolution and no effects, then you probably want to think about upgrading your computer in the long run. But these are some tips you can use if you are struggling with performance at the very least. Also, I would say that it's worth checking the Preferences menu. So if you go up to DaVinci Resolve and Preferences, you can see here for memory and GPU on the System tab of Preferences, there is GPU configuration. So if you don't know exactly which is better to use, OpenCL or CUDA for your video processing, then it's probably best to make sure that you have this set to auto so that your computer can automatically figure out which one to use. And I could imagine that could also have an impact on your video performance. If for some reason CUDA would give you better performance, so only go here and choose one manually if you really know what you're doing there. So tip number 5 is how to improve your dialogue track audio with a couple simple effects. So what we should do is go over to the Fairlight tab in your video after you've added on all of your video tracks and you've got your audio in. So let's just pretend that on audio track 1 that I had a recorded voiceover narration and I wanted to try to improve the audio on that a bit. So there's 2 effects I use all the time, which is noise reduction. So if you go to the mixer here, you can add noise reduction as an effect to an entire audio track. And that's better than adding it to each individual clip because it means that it will apply it to every clip in the track all at once and you don't need to worry about it anymore, even if you add on additional video clips. So if we click on the plus button here, we can go to noise reduction, do Fairlight effects, and then noise reduction here. And what I generally do is just leave it on auto speech mode so that the program can figure out for itself what counts as spoken audio and what is just random background noise. And then I close that out. The second effect that I will add on is Dialog Processor. So if I hit the plus button and I go to Channel, Dialog Processor, then we're going to want to change this drop-down menu from either default to female voiceover or male voiceover, depending on what gender is narrating your track, obviously. So I'm a guy, so I put that on male voiceover. And that gives us some nice presets that we can work with. The only setting I tend to change from here is the D-rumble. I find that with my mic, if I have it set this high, then it kind of takes away a little bit from the original audio quality. So I will generally lower the frequency for D-rumble a little bit. But this is going to very much depend on your mics. So just any of these settings, you can play around with them a little bit and see if it makes your audio sound better or nicer to you. And if something is a problem for any reason, you can disable these individual effects one by one and just give it a shot, see if you like the sound of it better with the dialogue processor added on. And that's basically what I do whenever I have recorded audio. So number 6 is the use of ease curves. So whenever you add in a transition or a property keyframing, by default, it's going to be linear between those 2 points, as in the rate of change is the same for the entire duration of a little animation you try to add in. So if you do a zoom in of doubling the zoom, but over 1 second, then it's going to move at the same speed for the entire duration of the 1 second. So with simple ease curves, you can have it start slow and build up its speed, or you can have it start fast and slow down its speed as it gets to the end, which depending on what transition or animation you're trying to do, may give it a better look than just having that flat linear speed. Because if you think about it, like in real life, a car wouldn't go from 0 to 60 instantaneously. It needs to accelerate a bit, or when it's braking, it needs to decelerate. So let me show a couple quick examples of how you can add curves in. So let's start with using keyframes here. So I have in the top right inspector the ability to set keyframes for zoom. So let's keyframe right here to start our zoom. Go a couple seconds into the future, change the value to 2.0. So it's going to zoom in over that 1.5 or 2 seconds. So I can play it now where it just has that constant zoom speed, which is okay. If we want to add a curve to that, we can click on our clip and then click on this curve icon in the bottom right hand corner of the clip. And you'll see basically the curve editor for the properties that we've set pop up here. So for instance, I can go here and notice that the icon for the handle is on the left here. So that's we're going to want to select the left handle when we want to add the curve to the right. Likewise, if we want this curve over here, then we're going to want to select the right handle if we want a curve on the left. But if I select down here and I choose this left-hand curve, then it's going to take this linear thing and make it start slow and end fast. So now if I hit play here, you'll notice it starts slow and it gets faster as it goes towards the end, which you can argue is a more smooth transition than just having that instant 0 to 60 miles per hour speed of a car that can instantly accelerate. Which for certain properties is just going to look better than having an instantaneous speed increase. So an even more common place to add curves to is on a video transition. So in the effects library toolbox, we can just find any random transition and there'll probably be an option for using a ease curve with that. So let's find something here like a hexagon iris transition. So let's play the transition with no ease curves, and it just has that linear speed, which looks okay. But if we add in an ease curve to it, then we can control the acceleration of the clip. So if you left click on a video transition and you look at it in the inspector, you'll be able to go down here to the bottom and you'll find ease, which represents ease curves. And you can set it to an in and out or in and out ease curves. So the side that you add the ease to is going to be the slow side. So if you do an ease in, that means it's going to be slow at the start and fast at the end. If you do out, that means it's going to be fast at the start and slow at the end. And if you do in and out, that means it's going to be slow at the start and at the end, but faster in the middle. And this is, of course, to end up with the same result of being fully transitioned, but just controlling the speed. So let's go ahead and show now how it looks with ease in and out. So you can see it's very fast there in the middle and slow at the start and the end. So not all cases you'll want to use ease curves, and you just need to play around with it a little bit. Transition, I'd probably just use ease in instead, since I think the ease in and out looks a little bit too dramatic. And not in every case will you want to use an ease curve, but it's important to know that the option is there to give you a bit more control over the speed of your animations or the speed of your transitions. And just to show real quick, when you do add your ease curves in, you do have this little blue handle here where you can actually control the curve of your animations when you want to get a little bit more direct control over the acceleration and the speed of the changes in values between your two properties or animations, basically. So my 7th tip for this video is where to actually find free materials that you can use for your videos. So when you're finding assets that exist out there on the internet, you'll want to keep in mind the licensing rules of the materials that you use, so you don't break any copyright or that kind of thing. But there are some really good sites where you can find materials that you can generally relatively freely use with your videos. But of course, for each asset you check, make sure you do check the license, whether it's Creative Commons or public domain or whatever it is, and the rules behind that before you go ahead and use that. So one is Pixabay, which is a site that you can find photos, illustrations, vectors, videos, and now I guess they actually have a music category there too now. So this is a place where you can come to find things like free stock images and free stock video clips that can be really useful for things like creating thumbnails or for adding images into your creative projects. So you can see when you click on an image, you can see the Pixabay license. In this case, free for commercial use, no attribution required. Make sure that is the case for anything you click on. I'm not sure if every image on the site is like that. And so yeah, you can basically grab these and use them in your projects, which can be really handy. So the next site over here is Pexels. So as you can see on Pexels, they also have stock photos, but you may have noticed in a lot of my recent tutorials, I actually do grab stock clips over from the videos tab of Video Pexels. So my internet's not working the best right now, but as these kind of load, there are actually a lot of pretty well shot clips that you can use in your videos for basically whatever your purposes need. And then if you click on the clips, they tend to have those licenses where you can just kind of use them freely, even in commercial projects. Also, freesound.org. So if you are looking for a bunch of sound effects that you want to use for your videos, this is a pretty good place to start. You do have to log in to download things, which can be a little annoying, but you just got to basically register an account and log in. It's not a huge deal. and you can search for all kinds of sounds that people have made. Now, note on this site that the licenses for those sounds are going to vary a lot. So if you hover over the license section of a clip, which is kind of usually located over here to the right, you can see if a sound is Creative Commons, and if it is Creative Commons, which kind of Creative Commons license it is, because there are different varieties and the rules for each one is different. Some sounds are also basically public domain, free to use, no attribution required, but you got to be careful about that kind of thing. But if you're just looking for a database where you can search a bunch of sound effects that people from around the world have uploaded, then this is a good place to start for that. Now, if you're looking for music for your videos, and if you watch YouTube videos, I almost guarantee you have heard this guy's music at some point in time, but Kevin MacLeod is a music producer who creates lots of background music with no vocals, and the diversity of the genres he's created means that there's probably something in his music database that would match your YouTube videos if you need to do that, or if you're working on other projects as well. So if you come to incompetech.com and you go over to his music section, then you can find a huge amount of music which you can use for your videos. Now, once again, if you look through this guy's more popular tracks, I almost guarantee you're going to find something that you've heard on YouTube somewhere before, and maybe you just didn't know who the guy was. Well, there you go. It's Kevin MacLeod. So yeah, really great source for music, and you just got to give attribution to him to use it in your videos, since he uses Creative Commons as his licensing scheme. Okay, so my 8th tip is to use markers for setting up timestamps on your video projects, especially if you're going to be making videos that are 10 minutes or longer. Having timestamps is really handy, and one of the features that they've added to YouTube lately is that if you timestamp in your description, that it will actually reflect that in the play bar. You can jump to those timestamps really easily because those timestamps will show up on the play area of your YouTube video. So if you want to start creating basically markers to indicate timestamps that you'll later use, then you can just jump to positions on your timeline and click on this little marker button to set a marker. So that basically includes a time in your video, and then you can double click that and give it the description. So I will say generally like what to expect as the start of my video, just kind of explaining what it's about. And then you can go to the later point in your video. Maybe you've made a bunch of cuts and you decided, oh, this is about the point where I break into my second section. So I add another marker there. So here I can kind of label it whatever I would make my second timestamp in the video. So maybe the big reveal, exclamation mark, or something like that. And you don't have to worry too much about if you make ripple deletes in your video after you've added the timestamps. So if I decide here, oh, I'm going to cut this little bit out, and I select it with my mouse and I hit delete key as I was recommending earlier on, then you can actually see that the markers will move with the ripples. So as long as you're using the delete key to make those ripple deletes when you need to cut chunks out, everything to the right will be pushed to the left, and these should still be in the position that they need to be in to give you accurate timestamps. So then what you do after you export your video and you've made all of these timestamps is you just kind of go in here and copy the timestamp and the description to your video, put it in the description, and then it will show in the play bar for the YouTube video. Kind of like up here, it'll just kind of describe what each section is as you hover over it, like I'm going to do in this video. So if you look at the play bar in the YouTube window, then you should actually see my timestamps. But yep, you just kind of take the numbers here and put those over to the YouTube video. Now note that as far as I know, timestamps on YouTube run in minutes and seconds. So the middle numbers here, after the 01, comes the colon and then minutes, and then colon and then seconds, and then colon and frames. So I'll just round the frames to the nearest seconds. In this case, I would just say 16 seconds, the big reveal. So it would be 0:16 space the big reveal, and that's how I'd timestamp there. But before that, I'd have 0:00, what to expect, and then so on in the video. If you check the description of this video, you'll see what I mean. Okay, number 9, changing timeline frame rate. So if you've ever added a clip into your timeline and then decided, hey, you actually want it to play at a different resolution, then you go up to File and Project Settings, and you look here under Master Settings, and you see the timeline frame rate is locked. So here you can see it's locked to 24 frames per second, and you're not really sure how to actually change that. So unfortunately, once you've actually added clips to your timeline, it's kind of locked in place, but there's one way that you can change it without completely resetting your project. So that's to basically delete your timelines. So what you can do is cut away all of the materials that you've been working on. So Control X, select the timeline in the media pool and hit delete, and then hit remove. And now that your timeline is gone, you can go up to File, Project Settings, and you can actually change the timeline frame rate to, say, 30 frames per second. So I'll do that, I'll hit save, and you'll see that like once it's changed, you can't really redo it. Though I think technically until you create the timeline, you can still change it. So now let's go up to File, New Timeline. So I'll call this the 30 FPS timeline. And I can hit Control V to paste back in all of the clips I had before. So it's not the most ideal of solutions, but if you've just been starting a project and you notice that and you want to not lose the work so quickly, then you can cut away your materials, delete your timeline, go up to the File menu, Project Settings, and then you can change your timeline rate before you create a new timeline. Okay, so tip number 10 is going to be using the power windows on the color tab and showing you how easy it is to track things like a person's face using those power windows. So if we go over to the color tab here, and we have this guy's face here, we want to track it. Like the most common idea here would be to blur a person's face out. So DaVinci Resolve is pretty good at tracking objects, especially people's faces. So if we go over to the window tab here, we can create a power window to basically define the area we want to track. And then we go to the tracker and track forward in the timeline to keep the window on top of that person. So let's go to the start of this video clip here, and let's add in a circle power window, since a circle or an oval is roughly going to be the shape of a person's face. And let's stretch the position of this power window to match the oval shape of a person's face a little bit better. Okay, so we have that there, and we can go to the next tab over, and we have the tracker here. So we'll just track it on all of the different dimensions here. If you find that the results aren't ideal, you can start cutting away at some of the ones which may be a little bit unnecessary and overcomplicating the tracking. Sometimes it gives better results to just track on a few different things rather than tracking everything. And it'll definitely give you better performance on the tracking in terms of how long it takes to track if you're tracking less stuff. So let's go ahead and hit the track forward button. And you'll see that it's going to track this guy's face pretty well over the duration of the clip. So if I go back to the start here and hit play, you'll see that as the person's head jerks around a little bit, everything is tracked very, very smoothly. So obviously this is a really easy example of following a person's face around on the screen. In many cases, your results won't come so easily and you'd have to mess around with it a little bit more. But imagine that if you were trying to manually move a mask around on the screen to follow this guy's face, it would be hard to get it to be as smooth and accurate, and it would take a lot more time than if you just use the power windows for this sort of thing. So now that we have this area selected over the course of our video clip, the power window, we can basically add effects to what's inside the power window than what's outside the power window. So for instance, I can go to this blur tab here and ramp up the blur, and what this will mean is that anything in the power window is going to get blurred, but everything outside of the power window, basically serving as a mask, is not going to be affected. If I want this blur effect to be a little bit more blurred out, like less specifically focused in the center area, but affecting the outsides a little bit, you can click on the power window and drag this handle out so that the effect is not as sharp and specific to one point, but eases in and out as it falls into this red region with the less visible outer and inner lines. So I don't want to get too much into power windows here because I've done longer, more complete videos on the subject, and this is just a quick 10 editing tips video. But there's a lot of other things you can do with power windows too, like changing the colors of certain regions, or you can actually cut regions out of your video clip from the timeline entirely by basically using it as a literal standard mask. So if I add a alpha output over here and I connect the alpha channels, so just like that, I can actually hide everything else outside of the power window from rendering to the final timeline. And then I'd have this black space to use for other video clips and that sort of thing. Or I can go to the power window, and then this icon here actually flips the masking of the power window. So instead I can hide what's on the face and show everything else. Maybe you want to replace the person's face or something silly like that. There's a lot of really interesting options that are available to you if you start using power windows and tracking. So that's pretty much going to be it for my 10 editing tips that you should know in DaVinci Resolve 16 for right now in 2020. I hope you guys learned a few things from this video. I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content.